The next principle of animation is that of anticipation. Now let's look at a ball jumping from side to side on your screen. In this case, the ball has good timing. You can see the slow in and slow out. It even has some squash and stretch. But to really sell the fact that he's launching himself in the air, we're missing the critical factor of anticipation. This is why anticipation isn't necessarily an animation technique, it's an acting technique. It's something that prepares the audience or your viewer for an action to come, and it makes the action appear much more realistic. So now let's go back and add some anticipation to our bouncing ball. In this case, you can see that little bit of a squash just before he launches himself into the air really sells the fact that he's jumping. Now this is with a little bit of anticipation. Let's add a little bit more. Now you can see he's really struggling to throw himself into the air. You can even add a lot of anticipation to your animation. This is why I emphasize that anticipation is very much an acting technique. It's going to be on you as the animator to know when and how to add anticipation for the actions that are about to happen. Anticipation is a set of minor actions that sets up the major action. Imagine that you went to a baseball game and you saw the pitcher standing in the middle of the mound. You know that he's about to throw the ball, and he's going to throw the ball very, very quickly. So we need to have a good buildup of anticipation that matches the amount of action that's to come. Because if we simply animate him from this position to throwing the ball, it's not going to be enough. We have to have him picking up his leg, cocking his arm back, and then finally slinging it all the way across. All of that is part of throwing the ball and the anticipation to build up such a speed. You can see this happening in the Donald Duck cartoon. In this case, he does a little wind-up before finally marching off the scene. Now, anticipation doesn't have to be very dramatic. It can be subtle. But even subtle anticipation can really sell the actions of a character. In this case, we've got the character looking from one side to the other and turning his head. Without anticipation, this movement looks very robotic and not natural. But adding little bits of anticipation, things like having his eyes blink and move along with the action, even his head cocks back ever so slightly before rotating, all of that goes into the anticipation of simply turning his head. Another way of adding some subtle anticipation is to do a take. Now, in a take, you're seeing the characters react to something that's off camera and unseen. So you get their reaction to it and build up to that major action of what's happening. In this case, Mickey's turning around to see a fire. And so that really sells the fact that he's excited and afraid for what's going on. Another thing you can do is a double take. In this case, they're reacting once and then really reacting the second time. Anticipation works best also for gag setups. Now, in a gag, this is when you expect one thing to happen, but something else happens in return. Some of the best gags are the Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons. In these cartoons, the coyote is always trying to catch the Roadrunner bird. He'll do something like set up a stick of dynamite underneath some birdseed. Then he'll go hide off camera, off scene. In this case, you're anticipating him being able to blow up the bird once he stops to eat the seed. But the gag is that he blows up. And so it emphasizes the comedy of this situation. You're anticipating one thing, but another thing happens. Another gag they do in Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons is have him fall off the edge of a cliff. Now, to really sell the gag, they have to build up the anticipation. In this case, you can see he's got his contraption going down the road and he notices the bridge is out. Oh no, he's about to go over the edge. So he's struggling to get it off. Do you know, is he going to go off the edge? So there he goes. Now it's building up the anticipation. Is he going to fall? Well, the rope is falling. He's looking down. He notices it. He's got just enough time to see that go by and give a little wave, and then he finally falls. All of that was a build-up and anticipation just to throw him off the edge of a cliff. Another way that cartoons like to add a little bit of anticipation to their unbelievable movements is by a flourish of the hand before they finally reach in to pull out some impossible object. In this case, this is kind of a magician's act. You'll notice a magician will draw emphasis to what their hand is doing before doing some important action. And in this case, they're pulling out some food or some hammer or something that doesn't seem like it would fit inside of their pocket. It really sells that unbelievable gag by adding a little bit of extra movement to their hand and to their arm. Another way that they do it is by reaching off camera to grab some large object that's not in the scene. Now, if you've ever wondered, where do they pull these objects from? Most cartoon fans have labeled this spatial dimension as hammer space, simply meaning that they can pull their hammer or their mallet out of nowhere because that's where the hammers are located. So the next time they're reaching for something, they're reaching into hammer space to pull it out. By the way, if you find yourself in hammer time, that's something a little bit different. Some additional notes on doing anticipation. It takes some extra effort for animators to build up anticipation, but doing this can pay off big for your realism. Very often, anticipation isn't written into the script that you're having to animate, so it's going to be your job to figure out when it's needed and where it's needed, and even how much anticipation is appropriate. You should use anticipation whenever important events happen. This is going to keep the viewer's attention. Remember, think of the magician. He wants to draw your eye to the most important parts, and so he's going to build up anticipation and draw your eye to his hand before finally selling you on what's happening. So use anticipation whenever something key or important is about to happen. Anticipation should really exaggerate realism. If you want to sell an action, sell it through the actions that are happening before to anticipate the major action to come. And the greater the anticipation, the greater the action that's going to happen. So let's do a simple demo to add some anticipation to a bouncing ball.